I was at a talk from Lex Roman and Chetna. So they give a talk kind of like what is growth design, kind of like a foundational talk. That was actually a really great talk. I recommend if you're interested in the field, you should definitely watch. So in there, she was talking about she uses the word growth designer to describe her philosophy on design and her skill set. And that totally clicked for me. And I was like, I was a growth designer all along.
Hi, guys. Good afternoon. My name is Emmanuel, and welcome to the Growth Design Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the growth shift. Today, I have with me Ran. She's a designer at Shopify. We're going to be demystifying the growth mindset. What does it take for you to make a shift or a transition from being a product designer to a growth product designer? Hi, Ran. How you doing? Glad to have you on the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on the show. Excited to be here.
Yeah, super excited to have you also. I've really learned a lot from your videos and some of your articles online, and I'm really excited to really have this conversation with you, Lee. So before we dive into the conversation, let's establish some foundations about the topic. So can you tell us in your word what is growth design and who is a growth designer?
Yeah, of course. So, well, growth design, probably if you ask 100 growth designers, and they'll give you 100 different definitions for what growth design is. So to me, growth design is pretty much the intersect between growth and design. So you will be a designer on the growth team. So what does that entail is it's like you are working on a discipline in product design that focuses on creating and driving sustainable business impact using human-centered design process and scientific method. Yeah, I was just gonna unpack that a little bit. So for traditionally we know design, right? As human-centered design, you use design thinking, you create the best user experience for your ideal customers. And growth is the field where it's all about creating business impact, like moving metrics, increase revenue, and things like that. So growth design is part growth and part design.
Yeah, amazing. So can you tell us who is a growth designer? So how do we come about the profession called growth designer? Because it looks like we also like as a product designer, a product designer also designs based on user centered design, design products and everything. So how is a growth designer different from a generalist or a product designer self?
Right. So, well, literally, a growth designer is a designer working in growth. And I had a YouTube video about this. What is a growth designer? So in the video, I talked about growth designer has three roles, which is like ultimately you are still a UX or product designer. So the first role you have is the designer. So you are your customer's advocate. You're always advocating for the best user experience possible for your customers. And the second role a growth designer plays is a strategic thinker. So you are actually an influencer. You have a seat at the table to be able to steer and shift your product focus and roadmap. So that's the second role. And of course, the third one is the most obvious one. Like the most obvious difference between product designer and growth designer is you are accountable for some sort of metric.
Yeah, amazing. Before the third point, I was going to really cut in where you talked about uh, the second point, which is having to to sort of be an advocate, and also how you could actually be at the seat, as designer. There's this there was this conversation back then, I think 2 or 3 years ago, about the state of design, that how design should really have a seat at the table of, at the C level table of companies or startup, that design should really have a say. The conversation then was really, really hectic. But I think as a growth designer, being a growth designer on a team, it really gives you that leverage, because you are not just designing for, say, just to solve problem, but then you are designing to solve problem, definitely, and also to move metrics, which is really important for a business or to a startup. And I think I so much agree with the three points you talked about. I've actually watched those videos also, and I also kind of had the link to the show notes so that other people can also learn from the video. So talking about your experience, I read a lot about you, that you sort of transitioned from an engineering, probably maybe a product engineer, or sort of maybe a civil engineer, I'm not sure. But I know that you transitioned from being an engineer to a product designer, and now you are a growth product designer. Can you tell us more about your journey through this, like how you journey through these transitions?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it would all make sense. I sort of have like kind of a interesting transition, which is
Eh,
a lot of transitions. So I started like I went back in school. So I did computer science in school, and in grad school I discovered this field called human computer interaction. And I was immediately hooked by the content. So while in school, like, like I wasn't sure what I want to do. And computer science and these interaction type of stuff is very attractive to me. So, and it's the moment when I discovered HCI, I finally realized, this is exactly what I want to do
Yeah,
with my life, which is designing, building software and technology for a certain group of people. So in school, I actually worked on a project called the Children's Dictionary, which is exactly that. I was building a dictionary prototype. It's kind of like a kids safe version of Urban Dictionary. You let children be able to define words, and in their the cutest little ways.
yeah,
So it was really fun, and I was just fascinated to watch them use the interface I created, which was terrible, by the way, because we're in school, it's all prototype. So that experience really showed me what it's like to do this type of work.
yeah,
But as a grad student, kind of sheltered, I wasn't sure if that there's a career related to my interest. So when I graduate, I just did all computer science students do, which is I found a job as a software engineer. So I wasn't a civil engineer for sure. Like I'm a fake engineer. So I got a job as a front end web developer, and because I really enjoy my time doing HCI, so I thought I enjoy the building part of the job. But soon after I get onboarded to my first job, I realized I'm missing something that wasn't like the building and like engineering of the tool part is not what I was like really interested in. And then I was like, maybe is defining what I'm building for people. So I transitioned into a PM role for a little bit, like a associate level PM role.
yeah.
And then I realized, oh shoot, like all I do is in a spreadsheet, and I hate spreadsheet. I was a terrible PM. So I realized, so product is also not what I want to do. But at that point, I've been in the industry for 2.5 years, and I worked with different people in different roles, and I learned there's such a job title called UX designer. And that's actually highly related to the learnings I had in school, which is HCI. And that just totally clicked. And I was like, yes, UX design and product design is exactly what I want to do. So that's sort of the trigger and reason why I transitioned into product design.
Yeah, amazing. That what really influenced your decision to going into growth design? Because definitely as a product designer, as a UX designer, you build product, you kind of, we can take a product from an idea state to a real life product where it's in the hands of customers, it's none of users, and, you see them using it to actually solve a problem. Can you tell us what really influenced your decision to niche down into growth design?
Yeah, so for me, I would say that's less a transition. I am always a growth designer. It's just when I was more junior or like before the growth field has developed enough, I just I didn't have the experience or knowledge to be eloquent in what I do. So um, I always think I stand behind my growth design methodology and processes. Like I've always been thinking that way, designing that way, and like the actual transition or switch to become a like I'm doing the air quote thing. Growth designer is more of a branding change rather than a career change for me. So I don't know if you're aware of Lex Roman. So before I met Lex Roman, I was just kind of doing my work, and there's certain. So I think for yeah, before I met her, like I was kind of in my way doing my design and just design's normal. I'm a product designer or UX designer, whatever. And then one day I was at a talk from Lex Roman and Chaitna. So they give a talk kind of like what is growth design, kind of like a foundational talk. That was actually a really great talk. I recommend if you're interested in the field, you should definitely watch. So in there, she was talking about she uses the word growth designer to describe her philosophy on design and her skill set. And that totally clicked for me. And I was like, I was a growth designer all along. So that's less for me a career change, but more of a way to tell other people what type of design that I do and how I'm
Well,
thinking of
amazing,
design.
amazing. I think, definitely I like your part of story because I actually thought as a product designer, most of the time we are more focused on building great experiences, right? So we love to build product from ideas. Maybe there's a problem to solve. There's an idea that maybe a founder, or maybe when you're freelancing or when you're working at a team, there's a feature that you need to really build. So as a product designer, I believe that we are focused more, like in quotes, on building a good experiences for customers or for users. But why I sort of asked the question, because I know when I was also working as a product designer, which I still do right now, I don't normally put the lens of growth, right? All I focus on is how does this user go from point A to point B, you know? Or as a growth product designer, I think having that lens of growth is a little bit different from a generalist, right? So that was why I sort of posed the question, like, what really shifted from you being someone who designed from that perspective of designing for great experiences to designing for a specific goal now, designing for maybe onboarding, designing for acquisition, designing through the growth funnels, right? So that's how I should phrase the question, that um, when you start designing for or let me put it this way, how did you get to design for growth? Like, even if if you are started as a generalist, how did you start designing as a growth designer? Let me put it that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
well, spicy take. I think all designers should
Okay.
function like a growth designer. There's like a subtlety difference between product team and growth team. Like if you have to like really argue about it. But to me, I think I have always been thinking about design this way. Um, like I would say when I really became a growth designer is when I started working at Amplitude. So I joined Amplitude kind of early on, where we were just trying to build a analytics tool for product team and growth team so that they are more close to data. And then to really like at the early stage, we didn't really know exactly what Amplitude is going to be. And product led growth wasn't a thing. Product analytics isn't a category at all. So Amplitude kind of helped create the product analytics category. So now everybody is talking about it. But before that, we didn't know what we're building. So we were doing a lot of learnings by talking to other product teams to learn like what makes a good product team, how should a product team build product and things like that. And as we're learning, and then we started to use more and more data
So,
to inform our thinking. So, well, and it makes sense because we have all the data, like we use Amplitude to design for Amplitude. So there's a lot of dog fooding going on. So we're lucky that we have all the data uh, in our hands. And so that kind of just really formed the growth, uh, like the growth part of my design processes. And that's when I really learned about, I guess, the field and when I started to incorporate different types of data, like both qualitative data, which I was using before, and then I augmented with quantitative data because of my work at Amplitude. And then I sort of joined our like first growth team. We didn't always have growth team, so towards my the late stage of my tenure there, we started a growth team, and we were focusing on some of the acquisition piece. And that's when I really started doing quote unquote growth design, and I worked on part of the funnel. But before that, as I mentioned, like I always believe in you should always set a goal. Like as a human being or as a designer, you should always have a goal. Like whatever you do should have some sort of goals to guide you into the right direction. Like otherwise, why are you designing like this beautiful UI or this perfect user experience? So you should always have something to work towards. It doesn't necessarily needs to be part of your pirate metrics, like your funnels. It can be just something like feature adoption. Like I would argue all product designers should strive to raise their feature adoption for the feature they design. And that's arguably
yeah.
part of growth design.
Yeah. Definitely. I think I agree with you. And, you know, when you talked about the aspect of having the growth team, where you said the growth team and the product team, that's always been sort of my argument because, you know, right now, or let me put it, most startup right now, or most company definitely have a product team. But then when it comes to having a growth team, it's not all company that really understand the aspect. And that's where the point of argument always comes in that, okay, a product designer, also the same thing as growth product designer, yeah, there was this argument one time on the um, growth designers Slack community where, um, people were talking about, designers were sort of talking about, how should, like, is there really difference between when you have this nomenclature on your name as a growth product designer and a product designer, But just like what you said, it's about having that mindset right from the beginning. Like as a product designer itself, you should always have the mindset of growth, right? Having the right mindset that when I'm designing for this good experience, it shouldn't just be on the table, right? It shouldn't just be there. But how do people really adopt those features? How do people adopt the product? Which it's really, really a good mindset to really has to really have as a product designer in general. And I think I really like that. So let's dive deep a little bit. Now, let's assume that right now, that as a product designer, definitely it's it's normal to see a product designer as a generalist, and also to see a growth product designer as a specialist. Now, it's arguable because as a growth product designer, there are some activities I believe that we do as growth product designer that are a little bit peculiar in terms of doing sort of the way we use data is a little bit different. Experimentation, looking at those growth loops, really looking at different funnels. So uh, I would like to ask, like, what um what will you advise, or what would be like a learning path for someone who is a product designer right now, who is trying to put on the lens of growth? You know, yes, is as a product designer, we should have a goal, but as a product designer who is looking to make that shift, having that mindset shift into putting growth as one of as one of his mindset when you're working as on product, how do you what will you advise, or is there a path to take when making those mindset shifts to being a growth designer?
Yeah, definitely. So, like, I'd say you're right that, like, most growth designers are generalists as well, and with a
Yeah,
specialization in growth. So you're actually a super generalist because you have more skills. So it's kind of like a T-shaped skill map, right? It's like you still know you use user research because you're a designer and you do interaction design and visual design probably as well. And then if you work on like acquisition or top of the funnel, you touch a lot of
that's
marketing uh, related design. So you probably know you have to know marketing, web design, like information architecture. So you actually have to have knowledge in everything, and the growth specific skills comes like um, as well in that package. So there's like different things like first of all, if you're interested in the field, you should probably just study some of the theory, like just getting to know like what is growth design, like how is the like different companies in the industry define this term, like that knowledge probably can come from like reading or doing a little bit research on the internet or talking to like current people in the growth field and just trying to get the insider knowledge into like the theory of the field or the processes that people follow. And then there's also like a reflection of yourself and the skills that's required to become a designer specialized in growth. So look at your weaknesses and then decide how you can better some of the weakness that you have. Like I think for me and for I would say for a lot of designers, that data could be a part that always can be improved on. So you could actively seek for uh, materials and resources to help you become more comfortable with reading data and use data to inform your design decisions. And then there's always another piece, which is, I think, very important, which is the experience. piece. Like if you have not like designed for an A/B testing at all, like I would say have some sort of way to get that experience to actually launch an experiment, track the results and see how did it go, and just really experience the work, learn by doing. I think that's a very roundabout way of saying the learning path
Yeah,
for
amazing.
becoming a growth
Amazing.
designer.
So you talked about two things, talk about, how you need to, learn how to use data more. And also you talk about, having to learn by doing, which definitely it's really very important as a product designer to really try to learn by experience, by actually doing the work, because most of the time, when you watch tutorials, when you read books and those courses, it's always different because having to really see real life experimentation where you do your A/B testing, you see how user really behaves. It's amazing, and it really it could really help you inform your design decision rather than just designing from your intuition, which one of the reasons why I believe designing for growth is a little bit different actually. Yeah, thank you so much for that. So I'm diving deep again. Let's talk more about a growth designer, working as a growth designer now. So can you a little bit talk about how how do a growth designer take advantage of data? Because it's one of the bread and butter of a growth designer. How do one as a growth designer take advantage of using data to really influence their work?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways. Like, for example, I think this come from my engineering background. Like, even as a junior designer, I was looking for some sort of evidence to prove my design decisions. Like, for example, like how do you, if you don't measure or you don't have any data, how do you know if the experience you design is appropriate or not? So, a data can be like such an easy way to help a designer understand and evaluate their own design intuition. Like, for example, if you design a feature, simply by looking at the data of how many people adopt this feature, and you can look at feature retention, which is for everybody who discovered this feature, uh, how often do they come back to repeatedly use this feature are really good indicator and information for you to know as a designer, and you can use those data to evaluate how good of an experience that you've designed as well. So that's just like one easiest example. And of course, if you work on a proper growth team, you usually have a team metric that you're accountable for. So after you launch a feature, let's say to drive acquisition, like where lead generation, did your design actually help move the needle in that metric? Is another way to just give you a quick indicator on the effectiveness of your design choices.
Yeah, great. You talked more about those you mentioned about measuring the impact of what you do as a designer. So let me dive to this side of the question. Yeah, let's say you're working on a growth team. How do you measure your impact? Like, how do a good designer, measure, or how do a growth team measure their impact?
How do good designer measure their impact? Yeah, part of that is related to your goal. So for growth, is always in some sort of loop form. It's like chicken and eggs. Like you want to have a goal, and that would ultimately be the criteria you evaluate yourself on. So before any design project, you should have some sort of goal in mind, as we talked about earlier. So if your goal is to drive like lead generation, like number of leads that you captured with your design. And then how you measure your impact will be how many leads you captured with your design. So you measure that, and then you will be able to later look at the data and see if your hypotheses on why this design would capture more leads is true or not. So that's a very obvious way to measure your impact. And if you like, a lot of times, if like it's so easy to push to move business metric, like nobody will be working on this anymore. Like everybody's startup will be the next Facebook or Google, right? Like business metrics is really hard to move, and they're what we call like lagging indicators, which means like everything has to go well for something like revenue to move. Sometimes it's hard for you to like directly argue your design contributed to this specific business goal. But what you can do is also measure yourself on some sort of secondary metrics. A lot of times for designers, that could be usage metrics. For example, how many people discovered and used your feature or did this action. And then you can look at the retention of people who uses your feature, and that would be a good value indicator. It means like these users, if they repeatedly come back and use this functionality, that means one, they find this functionality useful, and two, they find the user experience somehow fit into their existing workflow and process. And then you can always use your designer superpower to add qualitative lens to these hard data by like doing either usability testing or user interview, customer interviews, to get a validation on your interpretation of the data is correct.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for that elaborate analysis. I also want to talk about challenges, right? As a designer who is specializing in growth, are there sort of challenges that you face as a growth designer at your present, duty as a growth designer at Shopify? What are the challenges that you've sort of encountered?
Yeah, so there are lots of challenges, and you probably have different challenges based on different organizations that you're in. So there are some common ones, like one that I see a lot of times is the lack of access to data, especially the data that are useful for designers. So we all talk about like all business track data, like revenue, profit, things like that. But if you're just tracking these high level data, like my retention is really low, or my retention is, I don't know, 25%, what does it mean? Like you don't even know if it's good or bad or if it's getting better. And for designers, you can't really use these high level metrics. It doesn't help inform your design decisions. So you need to be able to access the usage level data. Like for example, how many people click on this, or how many people has an error messages, uh, seen this error messages by doing this. It's like for designers, there's a lot of nuance that you kind of want to know if you're really data driven. And it's very hard because tracking data requires a lot of resources. So not a lot of organization has these type of resources to help you. Like I wish if I know how to get into our GitHub, I would track everything. But it's really hard to do in real life. So you have to either rely on like company resources to help you doing that, or acquire some sort of tool to help you get access to these data. So there could always be more data. There could be always like data can always be more accessible to
Yeah.
people. So that's one. I would say another challenges that I have is like for a lot of companies, like especially bigger startup, bigger teams, where they will have specialization between a core experience team and a growth team. So that's where the conflicts start to happen. Because as a growth designer, at least for me, like how I believe a growth designer should work is really get deep into the customer problems. And I do a lot of qualitative research, believe it or not. It's not just data. So I do a lot of qualitative user research, and I am aware a lot of, we'll say, either user experience kinks or like experience difficulties that's preventing user from getting value, or they're failing to connect themselves, their workflow to the value you're creating. And then that require you to actually change the product in some way to remove these barriers. And that's very hard to do in a lot of teams where you have a core experienced team, because they kind of act as a gatekeeper to prevent you to to get the level of freedom you want in terms of your experimentation or whatever feature or improvement you're trying to do. So there's a lot of conflict in terms of what growth team should own. Like I am not the type of designers that I just want to do like onboarding modals and pulsars and just say, hey, there's a pop-up blinking like 50% off for annual. um like these small changes, like yes, it will drive some results if you launch it as A/B testing, and especially when there's a lot of low-hanging fruits, you can like achieve impact with these type of peripheral changes. But at some point, you have to get into the core product to be able to drive bigger impact. And
Yeah,
for me, the challenge is how do you set up your org in a way to enable your growth team to be able to run with their idea?
yeah. I sort of agree with you on that. But I want to go back to the first challenge you sort of mentioned about getting data. And you sort of mentioned a couple of data, and also in your conversation, you talked about how it's really difficult to get some of this data. But I want you to sort of walk us through, are there tools out there that you've used on your team or in previous times that you've used that is really tools or resources that are really useful in times of solving that problem of how to really get those data? Like, are there tools, resources out there that's really helpful for one to really know how to use the data and how to acquire this data? I know of Amplitude, but I don't know if the other ones that you have used, and you just share some of them.
Yeah, definitely. Amplitude, uh, for sure. I am biased, but also I've been mainly using Amplitude for the company that's like I worked at as well. There's always Mixpanel, which is very, very similar to Amplitude. They're the product analytics tools. There's also one level higher, the BI tools, where it require a little bit more effort to get data. For example, Mode or Looker. You could use those tools to get insights, get some sort of data. And then for larger companies, there's always internal infrastructures that give you sort of analytics. Um, so those tools as well. But I think the best tools for designers are things like Amplitude and these product analytics tool. There is, I think, Heap that does auto track. I have not personally used them. I know with auto track, it always come with noisy data, uh, and there's like a little data trust issue there, but it could be a like a way for you to get some data and make non-mission critical decisions with.
Yeah, I think we use EAP actually. We use EAP and some other tools also just to capture some of those data. And I think EAP also does a great job. And yes, definitely there are a lot of tools out there that really deals more with product analytics. Definitely. So in sort of trying to bring the conversation to a close, what have you learned so far? What have you really learned maybe from where you started or where you start as a product designer? What have you learned so far as a good designer that you would sort of push out there as an advice to designers that are just coming into the field?
Yeah, I'd say focus on problem solving. Is I think with designers, especially very highly skilled visual designers, is very tempting to just focus on little design details, and you're trying to like make it really like your pet projects, like making the UI really beautiful. But for me, it always start with the big picture, the problem. Like for every project, be crystal clear on what is your problem, why this is a problem for you, and why you're solving this. And then be very clear to articulate to yourself or your team a hypothesis, an assumption that you have on the solution. And do that before jumping into the solution space. And then by doing this is kind of will help you abstract yourself away from all the UI patterns and the visuals and the colors of things into the core of the business problem. And that helps you actually generate more ideas for your solution later on to help you diverge your thinking. And then it always help you tell a better story at the end.
Yeah, great. Great. So, what sort of books or resources that you will recommend out for designers out there who are looking to also learn more about good design? What are books that you've read or resources out there, communities out there that you recommend?
Yeah, so I would just say growthdesigners.co community has really good resources. So if you go to their website and you do growthdesigners.co/resources, they curated a really nice list of articles and talks and books that's very useful. And they even categorize it into different categories like goal setting, research, analytics, and experimentation. So that's always my start when I'm looking into research or learning something. They also have a good newsletter and Slack community that I believe we're both part of.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's a good one-stop shop for growth resources.
Yeah. I so much agree with you. And the good designer community, the good designer app.co is actually a very, very good and resourceful community. And it has a lot of people that sort of think in that mind, had that's a lot of good designers that you can think of, and there are a lot of resources to get from there. Thank you so much, Ran, for really this episode. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'm very sure we'd actually meet, have this conversation, like have another conversation around growth very soon.
Thank you so much.